In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan chats with Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. Weiser was previously the dean of the University of Colorado Law School and the founder of Silicon Flatirons, a CU Boulder organization that focuses on the intersection of law, innovation and entrepreneurship, and public interest. Early in his career, he was part of the federal initiative that shaped the Telecom Act of 1996. Phil and Dan's discussion covers all of these topics, including a specific focus on how to have civil discourse on sensitive topics such as Roe versus Wade. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Phil Weiser, Attorney General Phil Weiser. And I think the proper way to, if I understood this correctly from a few years back, the proper way to refer to an Attorney General is General Weiser. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
I say, please call me Attorney General Weiser or Phil, whatever you're more comfortable with. And if you want to tease me, you can call me General Weiser. So
okay.
You can call me General Weiser, but I will invariably find it humorous whenever I'm called that.
Well, I will refer to you as Phil.
Please.
Unless we go a little bit off track, I'll be like, come on, General. That'll be my sarcastic response.
You got it.
Likely not to be used. So we met many years ago, and we're going to go and talk about the context and what we met there, because that did influence kind of my journey to some material degree. And we're going to talk about present day as well. And in the present day, as we're having this conversation, we're weeks away from the federal election. We're not going to talk about the specific points of view about the merits of this or merits of that, but I am interested in talking about kind of the political environment overall and where it is, why it's gotten to a point where I think we both would agree feels very unhealthy, and what might be some paths forward where it gets back to somewhere far more healthy. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about, but we're also going to talk about wherever the conversation leads us.
Awesome.
All right. So maybe let's start by reflecting back to when we first met. And as best as I can recall, it was in the context of Silicon Flatirons, probably one of the first board meetings that I attended. The first one I attended was probably the first time I really met you. I don't know what circumstances led me to join that Silicon Flatirons kind of board meeting, nor do I know if it was the Entrepreneurship Initiative or the broader one, but I'm pretty certain that's the context in which we first would have met. So tell us what that is. Tell us what Silicon Flatirons is, what Silicon Flatirons Entrepreneurship Initiative is, and what the origins of that organization are.
Dan, I'll start just a little further back because it gives the context in my life. I went to law school because I was interested in service, and I didn't know what would happen exactly. I'd thought about working in government. I'd been interested in how we can help support people. I'm a first-generation American, and my grandparents and mom survived the Holocaust, meaning I grew up with this real deep appreciation for what our nation's about, and I wanted to give back and serve. After law school, I came out to Colorado to clerk for a federal judge. That was 1994.
By the way, to the extent you're comfortable, would like to come back to some of the present-day circumstances in the world, which obviously affect the topic or are related to the topic you just brought up.
Yeah, we're a little over a week away from October 7th, 2024. And for many of us, October 7th, 2023 is still an open wound. More people were massacred a year ago than any time since the Holocaust. So the idea that I have always had with me is we need to be vigilant in how we protect this project of a democratic republic. We need to make sure that we don't allow demonization and hate to turn ugly as we know it can. I didn't know where that was going to bring me, and I clerked again a second year at the U.S. Supreme Court for Justice Byron White, who's retired, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I just got a lucky job break at the Antitrust Division as counsel to Joel Klein.
And how did you end up in law school? Because that would have been while you were in law school or after?
After law school. So I went to Swarthmore College being broadly interested in public policy and public service. A mentor said to me, you need to go to law school. His theory, which I actually still believe, that law is this great background, not just for public service, but you can fall back on it as a profession. you can practice law. You can use the degree in lots of ways. So I went to law school for two purposes. One is to prepare me for public service, but second, as a fallback, if you're not working in government or around, politics, what else could you do? And I didn't know where that would lead me. And I didn't know what type of law I was going to be interested in. And the job I got at the Antitrust Division was completely opportunistic. I happened to get connected to Joel Klein. And Joel said, I need someone to be my counsel and focus on, and you're going to love this, Dan, Bell entry into long distance. We could spend a lot of time going back to this because at one point there was a world that most young people can't even believe. You had local companies, Bell operating companies, and you had long distance companies. And the 1996 Telecom Act said we're going to let the long distance companies compete into local, and the local companies enter the long distance. And Joel Klein said to me, Phil, we have a role at the Antitrust Division because we used to oversee the consent decree. I need you to help figure out how to think about this.
So you just mentioned the consent decree. So let's rewind backwards in time. I'm looking at my bookcase there. Actually, it's probably over there, the book The Deal of the Century, if maybe you guys...
Oh, it's a great book.
Bring that up here. I think you gave me this copy of it, and I think you signed it.
I could have. You're very generous. So if I was able to do the favor, you can only buy this book now on Amazon used. It's no longer in print. It's one of the best books I've ever read. As a legal matter, I'd put it up there with like a civil action. It reads like a novel, and it's about the story of the AT&T monopoly and how a lawsuit broke up this monopoly and enabled competition in telecommunications. I came into this world in 1996. This lawsuit was filed 1974. Right?
74.
Right, really... trying to remember, was it in the Ford administration or the Nixon administration? But it was amazing it got filed. It tells the story in the book. The Defense departments loved the AT&T monopoly, didn't want to let this get filed. And I think the head of the Justice Department waited until, if it's Ford was on an airplane, filed the lawsuit before they could stop it. And it's amazing this lawsuit, didn't get settled by Reagan. It broke up the Bell system. And then the question for the 1986 Telecom Act.
And it didn't get settled to 1983.
That's right.
74 to 1983, this was being perhaps litigated, certainly negotiated. And finally in 83, it resulted in Judge Harold Green.
That's right.
Kind of overseeing a decree that then led to the breakup of AT&T and the creation of what you described as being this parent company, AT&T, all these baby bells. But there still was a long journey in front of that to open up to full competition. And that brings us to
that's what I was doing. There was a
1986.
provision called Section 271 of the 1996 Telecom Act, and we had to evaluate these applications. The first one was from Ameritech, a company you know well, and we were thinking, what's the right standard? How do we think about it? And I worked on this with Joel, and we wanted to make sure that the market, the local market, was irreversibly open to competition. That was the standard that we...
And let me just jump in because I don't know if this is exactly one and the same, but it might be. So for Ameritech, the lead negotiator was Neil Cox. Do you remember Neil Cox?
No, I didn't meet him.
Okay,
I met your general counsel, Kelly Welsh.
Okay, at Ameritech?
Ameritech.
So Neil was on the business side, the lead negotiator. And the counterparty to the first interconnection agreement post the Telecom Act, the counterparty was none other than MFS. And at MFS, the legal leader behind that, I'm sure you know, and worked with Andy Littman.
Very closely, yes.
The business leader of that
yours truly
was me.
Dan Crusoe. This is what's interesting is if you came through this experience of telecommunications, you realized how important law and policy is, technology and business. And what happened, which was just like not my planning, but my good fortune. There was a position that came open in 1998, January. I was applying, maybe it was the fall of 97. A joint appointment in the law school at CU and an interdisciplinary telecommunications program. I had thought I was going to be more engaged in the practice of law, working in government. I thought maybe I'll teach on the side because I like teaching. But then I heard about this position that was a joint appointment, law school and ITP at Colorado. And I thought, let me see if I can take the stuff I've learned at the Department of Justice. I could go teach, I could write, and then I could be involved on the side in a range of ways. I said, let me try it. So when I came out...
So let me pause you for a second. So the interdisciplinary telecom program at CU, that still exists there, is that correct?
In ashes, unfortunately.
In ashes.
It got absorbed into computer science.
Okay.
And so it doesn't quite have the same form that it once had. Mm-hmm. And I was so fortunate because I was on this faculty. Dale Hatfield was a legend in this area. And it was an incredible learning opportunity because I got to learn from technologists, people who were more business and economic minded. And I founded the Silicon Flatiron Center because I said to myself, what if we had a place that was interdisciplinary, like the ITP program? What if we had a place where policymakers, academics, business folks could get together and have respectful dialogue about these issues? And I thought maybe we could get students involved to help prepare them for jobs. We had a conference January of 2000. It was called Telecommunications Law for the 21st Century.
Wow.
And we had former general counsels of these Bell operating companies that I got to know at the DOJ. We had Joel Klein, who I had worked with, came. We invited Michael Powell, who I'd worked with then, was an FCC commissioner. And I would say, if that was an experiment, that one-time conference, it really worked out. And I said, let's keep having these conferences. And we got a lot of the companies and law firms who were around to help sponsor it. And not too long after that, I got excited about the Boulder entrepreneurial system. And I thought we need to be engaged not just in law, but also in entrepreneurship. So we made the center, the Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, Entrepreneurship. And I had done some work with Level 3 during that time. So we might have crossed paths there. But
probably not, because I was, in those days of Level 3, I was so buried into not just my Level 3 world, but whatever little time I had outside Level 3, I had kind of a cocoon of an ability to kind of pick up my head and look around. So probably me having had time to even pay attention to that or the desire wasn't there. So I doubt we would have crossed paths.
There's a small chance in the lunchroom when I was having lunch with Jim Crow, whose memory lives on as a blessing. We might have. But in any event, at some point, we invited you to get involved. And when we set up this Entrepreneurs Unplugged series, I remember this vividly, you were our first entrepreneur for the Entrepreneurs Unplugged series.
Yeah, which I didn't even realize it.
You were the first one.
Until years and years later.
And that would have been like 2007. So we got you involved years earlier, and it was part of this effort. It was really great because we had all the support of people who appreciated what we're doing on public policy, and they were like fine with us supporting entrepreneurship. So we had like the New Tech Meetup, this Entrepreneurs Unplugged series, the New Venture Challenge, and you were an incredible supporter.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, you mentioned 2007. At that point, I had left Level 3. And one of my memories when I left Level 3 is, picking my head up and looking around saying, I don't know what anyone else does in this entire geography. We thought the world revolved around us, Level 3, both in the industry and in where we lived and worked. We thought we were, so interesting. The selfish point of view that we had as a culture, became clear to me as I started to kind of leave that and say, holy cow, I really don't even know what my neighbors do. I know my neighbors because our kids know each other. You talk to them, but if you ask me what they do, for most of them, I'd be like, I don't even know what they do. So that's when I started poking my head around saying, what's going on? And that's probably when I started to, get exposed to what you guys were doing at Silicon Valley, particularly the Entrepreneurship Initiative, and became supporter of the New Venture Challenge and thereafter, supporters of Startup Colorado when you guys launched Startup Colorado. So it really started to help me understand this whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that existed here, as well as how the role that the community plays, the interplay between the university and the entrepreneurial ecosystem itself. So people like you, Brad Feld, Brad Bernthal, were, helped me navigate how do I get from this cocoon of what was Level 3 into the broader community and then the broader kind of world.
Well, I appreciated your engagement, and whatever fueled it, it was clear how much you really appreciated and cared about the students at the university. Early on, I think you raised your hand and said, I'm going to help fund the winner of the New Venture Challenge. And that was a huge credibility gain for us. It raised the stakes literally and figuratively for the New Venture Challenge. And part of what we were sending out this message, you can start a company. And for undergrads, that was a powerful message because we've now gotten used to Boulder being such this exciting entrepreneurial hub. But at CU, back closer to 2003, 2004, 2005, entrepreneurship wasn't in the air quite the way it is now. And for a lot of young people, we tried to say, take an entrepreneurial mindset for your whole career. And that was a message that I brought to the law school, and a lot of people were really taken aback to say, wait a minute, you're telling lawyers they have to be entrepreneurial? And I have to tell you, one of our great success stories, Laura Lippman, no relation to Andy Lippman, of the one you're mentioning, she went to work at Zayo. And you kept hiring people from the law school, from ITP, and that was a really, again, special partnership because you were willing to say to people, you develop the right skills, we'll hire you directly. That type of pipeline, it made a huge difference for people.
Well, we developed a management development program that was modeled after what launched my career back in Illinois Bell and Ameritech. And so we launched this program where people would come in, go through rapid rotations in different types of jobs, get a lot of special attention with the broader executive team and otherwise. And that program produced so much talent. I mean, if you look at people who went through that program and say, what are they doing today? Most of them came from CU, and most of them went on to have really compelling careers, many of them either running companies or one level down from running companies, many of which are spin-outs of Zayo in one way or the other. Spin-outs meaning individuals who left Zayo and started something new or left Zayo to go run something different. And so many of them come through that CU part of our management development program. Wish we could have done more with that. And
you did a ton. Longer. You did a ton. And then you mentioned Startup Colorado. So I went to work for President Obama in 2009, 2011. One thing I did for President Obama was I was the point person for tech and innovation in the White House. We had a bunch of venture capitalists. 2010, Brad Feld put it together. And we asked the question, what can the federal government do to support entrepreneurship? And what came of that was the Startup America Partnership, which was to encourage every state to have a startup, Tennessee, startup North Carolina. When I came back, they said, Phil and Brad, we don't have a Startup Colorado. Can you guys lead it? So we did. And one of the things that came out of that, Startup Summer. And you raised your hand at Zayo, and I don't know how many interns you would hire every summer, but it was a significant number. And we had all the interns themselves do a little bit of a business pitch competition, developing that entrepreneurial mindset. And that was, again, huge. And then we also did a startup high school program that you got involved with at Niwot. So, Dan, I think of all the work we were doing, you were centrally involved in all of it. You contributed so much. And what's interesting is I bet there are lots of people whose lives you touched that you don't even realize it. And there's going to be people who come out of this entrepreneurial community who got an investment from you in the New Venture Challenge or got an internship, and that's going to help change their whole trajectory.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And that, as you get older and you get time to slow down and, and see things more clearly, you do come back and reflect on the impact you had on other people's lives more than anything else. And, part of our philosophy at Crusoe Ventures is that each employee, we want them to spend 20% of their time, their work time, not their evening time, not their weekend time, but their work time supporting the nonprofit community that revolves around innovation and entrepreneurship, including and especially helping those who come from kind of underserved areas get exposed to early on, that as a possibility for themselves and help them get through. So we don't do that directly, but we do that indirectly by both supporting financially and with resource engagement, organizations like Greenhouse Scholars, organizations like Access Opportunities. So, how do you help kind of navigate? Kids who grow up in underserved areas tend to know what a policeman does, what a teacher does, what a nurse does. But if you say, what does a computer scientist do? They're probably like, I don't know. What careers are there in tech? Who are the tech companies in the area? That's not what they get exposed to. So if you could help bring them into that ecosystem at younger ages, help them in their journey to get to college and through college and even beyond, you could have an impact on a lot of lives. So that's part of what we're all about.
Let me riff on that for a couple minutes. First off, that point you just made about mentorship for those who don't have mentors is so crucial. It's easy to overlook the difference. And I think a lot about this in the law context, but it applies in all contexts, like you mentioned entrepreneurship and computer science. Let's just pretend your grandfather and your father were both lawyers. So you grew up around lawyers and you knew all the secret handshakes. But then someone else doesn't have a parent or a grandparent who went to college even. They're not primed to think I could become a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're not going to necessarily go to law school unless there are effective mentoring programs. There's one called Law School Yes We Can, founded by Christy Arguello, which focuses on people who haven't had family members go to college or law school, first generation college students. And the goal is to bring mentorship to open up those doors of opportunity. And when we're at our best in Colorado, that's our culture, that's who we are, and we find ways to do it. And it's so important.
Yeah, you said when we're at our best in Colorado, one thing that I genuinely feel about Colorado is we are a better example of a functional society than many other parts of the U.S. I mean, people get along. I think there's less prejudice here. I think there's more reaching out to one another here in whatever community you're part of. It has a more positive kind of lean forward culture attitude that I don't, I could speculate where that comes from, but I think where it comes from is 100-year plus history of what made Colorado a state and kind of the navigation from here to there, including, how it continues to attract people to move here and the type of people it attracts and how they mesh together. But I think whatever challenges and issues we have in Colorado, and we have some, I think there's this umbrella of, man, we have a really healthy, functional kind of community and society here that we can build upon, as opposed to other areas of the country. I'd say, well, your starting point is maybe not as strong as ours.
I totally agree. And there's two dimensions there that I might lift up. One is we're not parochial the way, I'll pick on Philadelphia here for a minute, maybe Chicago too, Dan, where you're from, and definitely some New York where I'm from. Parochial in the sense, I moved here in 94 from New York. You moved here a little later. People didn't hold it against me that my grandparents weren't from Colorado or that I wasn't in this country club. There are a lot of parts of the U.S. where there's much more of a stratified social structure where you're not in the club or you're viewed more skeptically. Where here, you could have showed up yesterday and people are like, welcome, great to have you here. The other thing I would say, people root for each other to succeed. Like when you were building Zayo, we were rooting for you to succeed. When you and others were at level 3, we were rooting for you to succeed. And I remember the excitement I felt around both those companies, and I was on the sidelines. When you were helping us out, you were rooting for Silicon Flatirons to succeed. Having a spirit of people pulling for each other, as opposed to some places, oh, if he's succeeding, then I'm failing, so I'm going to root for him to fail. That is destructive for an entrepreneurial community. That is destructive for building bonds of collaboration. And we're fortunate in Colorado, the spirit we have.
And there is some aspect of human nature that drives that type of rivalry. Like maybe I feel like I got ahead a little bit more if someone else got pushed behind. So you have to overcome that human tendency. In fact, as you know, the theme of this podcast, one of the big themes is Colorado Innovators. And the reason we're doing this, because we're spending a lot of time doing this, the team more than me. It's not a revenue generating model, but what we're featuring is those who are innovating in Colorado, who we can celebrate, who we could bring attention to, we could give a forum to, and that includes certainly business and entrepreneurial leaders, but also includes people who are in public service. Mayor Mike Johnson was one of the first podcasts that we rolled out. It includes nonprofit leaders. The first one we actually recorded was the head of Greenhouse Scholars. We didn't launch it first, but it was the first one that got recorded. So we're looking to celebrate those who are going out of their way to contribute to the community in many different ways. We want to highlight them, we want to encourage them, we want to say thanks to them, and we want to do it by giving them a forum to tell their stories so other people can be inspired by those stories and learn from those stories.
I love it. It's very important for communities to have rituals, to have stories, and you curating some of these stories, celebrating people who maybe not everyone's heard about. It's important as we continue to think about who we value in this community, what are our values, and how we support one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about Colorado is we certainly, our history, at least, when I think back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we thought of ourselves as a purple state. And now we're not quite as purple as we once were. We're a little bit more kind of, balanced toward the D versus the R as a state. And certainly here in Boulder, it's very slanted toward D. And if you go down Colorado Springs, it's very slanted toward R. And depending on where you are in Denver, it kind of shifts a little bit here and there. I do fear that even in Colorado, the ability to have discourse between those who have different political point of views is not as strong as it needs to be. And that's one area that we're not leading by example like we could be. We're falling into the trap that is being set by all of us, in a nation of being divisive and wanting to, not just have your own point of view, but want to demonize the other, person's point of view. So first, do you agree with that characterization? If so, kind of how do you think about that?
Let me connect up the 2 points from one to the other.
And then I do want to come back to Brad Bernthal.
Good.
We're going to circle back to that.
The point you made earlier is that human nature sometimes is someone else is successful, you might feel some level of envy, and it might lead you to be less than kind, generous, or supportive. And it's important to have a culture that discourages that envy competition and encourages collaboration and celebration. And in Colorado, we are holding on to that culture, and it's crucial that we do so. Similarly, I think it's sometimes human nature, if someone disagrees with you on something, to put them down, to somehow think less of them, and maybe, as you say, even to demonize them. That is important to overcome with another ideal. When someone disagrees with you, and I take this from Roy Romer, and it's got great roots in the Talmud, which is the rabbinic commentary on the 5 books of Moses. The idea is if someone sees something different than you, you ask, what are they seeing that I'm missing? The Talmudic story, by the way, is you might get one rabbi says you light the Hanukkah candles left to right, and the other says, no, it's right to left. And then the resolution of the dispute of these 2 great minds, they're both right. So when you look at an issue that's an interesting, complicated question, don't just assume I'm right and the people who disagree with me are stupid. Assume that maybe there's some more I can learn by asking someone who sees it differently, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? And when we've pushed for legislation from my office as Attorney General, every single piece of legislation that we've pushed for has been bipartisan, where we've sought to bring other people along. And often there's compromise when someone says, hey, I don't love this. This is making a mistake. And we'll say, that's a good point. We can do it this way. How about that? That's because dialogue will make legislation stronger. And we've also tried to really push, and I was just talking to some college students at CU today about this, we've called our Ginsburg-Scalia initiative, honoring Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I worked for, and Justice Scalia, who had this great relationship, great friendship, not just in spite of the fact that they saw things differently, but because they did, and that they listened to one another in a respectful way. So we're trying to push that. To your point, are we seeing rising demonization? Are we seeing decreasing listening? Yes, and I worry a lot about it. I believe we have to hold on to norms of intellectual curiosity and listening, respectful discourse, and never demonizing others. Because here's the problem. Once you start demonizing people because they voted differently than you, or they look differently, or they talk differently, or they eat differently, we're done. What makes America great is that we are this inclusive republic, e pluribus unum, of many we're one, and we learn from each other.
Yeah. Do you listen to the All In podcast?
It's on my list, but I haven't as much as I should.
Yeah. One thing that's particularly interesting about All In is two of the main hosts who are really close friends and can joke with one another while they're having the polar opposite views on the political scene. And so I took a walk today before this podcast, and the latest pod drop that they did was with the vice president candidate for Trump, who for some strange reason, his name is escaping me. J.D. Vance, in a public forum. There was some kind of conference, but both the one who's sides that direction and one who doesn't are taking turns with questions, and it's a fun conversation. It's a fun, respectful, with very different points of view politically, driving both ends of it, but nothing that would make any of them uncomfortable. No demonizing, no like I'm smart, you're stupid. No kind of making up kind of facts to support your point of view. It was just a very interesting and compelling discourse where it's like, wow, how nice is that?
Well, Dan, I want to honor something that you've done for me. When I first started running, I sent out an email about something, and you were kind of giving some feedback and say, you don't have to say this. And I think the backstory is, I think someone had actually said, Phil, you might want to say something in your email that was less than generous to our former president. And you said to me, why do you need to do that? And I've been careful ever since. I don't want to demonize people in what I might call an ad hominem way, which means you just say something about someone as a person. You can say, I disagree with this person's views or position, but we should all try really hard not to demonize someone as an individual, because it doesn't contribute to discourse. It does the opposite. It silences discourse, and it turns people off in ways that are just unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, whatever your points of view on who should win the next election, I think the one fact that stands above all others is that pretty close to half the country is going to vote one way,
Yes.
and pretty close to half the country is going to vote the other way. And one's going to end up with a little bit more votes than the other.
Yeah.
One's going to end up with a little bit more electoral college votes than the other. Maybe, both those happen the same way. Maybe they don't. But any way you look at it, somewhere close to 50-50 is how the vote's going to come out. So the notion that anyone can demonize the other side without by implication saying, I think half the people who are voters in this country are idiots because they don't agree with the other half, is like the most ridiculous thing on the surface. It's like I assume no one really thinks half of the people in the country are idiots.
It's an interesting question. Here's what I'll say. From a matter of intellectual curiosity and political strategy, to say what you just said, half the country are idiots, is bankrupt. It's bankrupt intellectually because you must be missing something. There are a lot of people who are going to vote for one candidate or the other, and intellectually, how could you just write them all off as a category, as opposed to
as a 50% of the
it's
nation
a pretty big
category,
as opposed to what I believe is the intellectually responsible thing, which is ask questions. I'm curious, why are you voting for this individual? What is your position on X or Y? And then listen, honestly listen. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. The other point, if you are in politics, which now I am, I want as many votes as I can. And so if somebody is attracting votes, I want to know, why are they attracting votes? And I will tell you, there are Trump Weiser voters in Colorado. And I'll take all the voters I can get, whoever they vote for president. And if there's things I have to learn from different candidates, I'm always open for learning.
Okay, I think we're going to need to edit the part out where he said Trump Weiser. I don't think he meant to say he's aligned with Trump, but I could be wrong.
All right, let me give you that answer again. It's fair.
No, we're good.
No, because
that was an example. What you meant, which obviously is what you
but
said,
I think your point
is someone who would vote for Trump.
That's correct. That's
might
Trump.
also vote for you.
Yes,
which was clear.
No, but I'm happy to give you a cleaner version.
No. I like this version better.
Okay. Well, I do think there are people who could vote for Donald Trump and could vote for me.
Oh,
and why would I say
one might be in this room sitting next to you, depending on how things play out?
But why would you ever say, if you're in elected office, I don't want your vote because you voted for someone else? And why would I ever say to anyone, I demonize you? My view is our job, if you're in elected office, is to get as many votes as you can, to build as broad a coalition as you can, to listen as hard as you can. And if you're in the business of insulting people, demonizing people, then you're not doing that.
Yeah, let me add one other thing to your list of what you just said. The comfort level of so many kind of senior level politicians and people who are just having political discourse, not as politicians, on both sides, the comfort level of them using lies, and I picked that word for a reason, because lies means you know something is untrue, yet you say it anyways. And I've got to believe that they know what they're saying quite often is not factual, yet they use it as if it was a fact in their argument to demonize kind of the other side. Do you see that happening, or are you less convicted that that's happening so blatantly?
It's interesting. This conversation has a lot of parallels with the one I had at lunch with some students at CU. One of the situations that I was talking about, the generation that you and I grew up with, when we got information growing up, it had been edited and it had been vetted.
Yes.
Newspapers, TV, radio, they didn't put information out there that was completely fact-free and just running in the wild. Today's information environment, with so much information that is available on social media and other platforms, we're awash in misinformation and disinformation. Yes. I would then make the point you just made in the context of the broader culture. We are living in an environment where lots of actors in the political sphere and otherwise can find it in their interest to say things that they either know or should know are not true, but they get people worked up. They provoke people's emotions, and they are primed to go viral. And one of the painful realities of social media, lies, misinformation, is more likely to go viral than facts. Often facts are boring.
True. Yeah, but so maybe things have changed. So I stopped being a CEO in 2020, was a public company CEO for a number of years. But whether public company or private company, I could not imagine standing in front of the employees, standing in front of my board, standing in front of investors, speaking at a conference, and saying stuff that was just factually not true, but I would use it anyways to bolster my argument. I mean, I would lose so much credibility so quickly. I'd probably get fired. I could even end up jail if it was affecting the stock price. Yet it seems like a lot of our political leaders are quite comfortable putting themselves in that situation, and there seems to be no ramifications of that. In fact, they get ahead for it quite often.
Well, let me differentiate a couple of contexts. In legal settings and in business settings, there are consequences for lying. You can't win your case if it's based on fabrications. Ultimately, we're going to test for what is real evidence and what isn't. In a business setting, if you don't have real earnings, ultimately you're going to get caught. We can talk more about WorldCom, which is an interesting case study in that. But ultimately,
part of the Bandwidth book covers the whole WorldCom story, leaving it Sarbanes-Oxley.
It was unsustainable in the longer term, but there was a company, WorldCom, that did lie for a while about their earnings and made money short term. And you can talk about other short term, Ponzi schemes or whatnot. So it happens in business where you get people who are liars, but it's not sustainable. In law, you're not going to win your court cases if you don't have evidence behind you. In politics,
we may or may not challenge that, because we challenge that, we start to get into kind of the political environment of today. But I would say there's been at least a couple court cases recently that seem to be politically supercharged that I would question whether it was objective evidence and the rule of law that resulted in the outcome. But we could. I
mean, my broad submission is juries generally will hear evidence and evaluate it, and they operate in general in a fair way, and there's legal and appellate review.
Yeah.
Now, there may be cases that are, as you put it, atypical, but I will say the general system we have in this country is a fair judicial system.
And something we should and do feel pride about.
Correct.
That we're a rule of law country.
Correct.
That we've got a legal system that has withstood, for the most part, the test of time, and it creates kind of this check and balance that has made our country sustain itself in the way it has. I think, yeah, absolutely, that's something we should.
It's foundational.
Cherish, and it's foundational.
If you care about entrepreneurship, you want a legal system that prevents what happens in all sorts of countries around the world. If you're trying to build a successful wireless telecom company in some nations in Africa, for example, good luck getting a license for spectrum. Good luck keeping your business if you're not allied with the ruling party. And good luck not getting arbitrarily asked for bribes by law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Those dynamics are antithetical to economic growth and successful entrepreneurship. Here, you can be an entrepreneur, build your business, and no one is going to hold you up for, generally speaking, bribes. No one's going to say you're not eligible to compete because you're supporting the wrong person for governor or president or mayor.
I'll tell that to Elon Musk right now. Wasn't there just a lawsuit filed today on that?
No, I didn't see that. Who filed the lawsuit?
Elon Musk. That he's, and it's, this is today, so my fact check this for specifics, but he's being denied. This has to do with SpaceX and permits for launches. He's being denied because of his political,
But he's going to get a day in court. That's my point.
He'll have his day in court.
You'll get a day in court, and it'll be a fair process. That's what's different. There are other countries that don't have a judicial system that is independent and fair.
True.
But back to your point about politics and lies.
Let me bring one other thing up as well on that whole point. So as a public company CEO, at least once a quarter, I would have to sign my name on a document that was this thick with a lot of fine print. And by law, by Sarbanes-Oxley law, if there is something materially incorrect in those documents, I could theoretically be put in jail. Okay, so I didn't say if I signed something where there was intentional deceit. I didn't say, we kind of knew what was going on and we were trying to hide it and sign the document. It was like something in this thick document was wrong. Theoretically, the CEO is personally accountable, as I think the CFO is too. Now, in order to actually get prosecuted, in practicality, if it's kind of a footfall, you're probably not going to get prosecuted, but you could. Now, I contrast that to the people who wrote that law and approved that law, which is the U.S. Senate, the House, signed into law by the president. They don't hold themselves accountable to the same standard. They could knowingly mislead, knowingly lie, and they're not subject to any of the ramification there. So it seems a little bit, I kind of understand why it is, but it also seems like a double standard.
The premise of our electoral system is accountability will be at the ballot box. The premise had been built on norms that politicians who lied could be called out and shamed for that, and that there would be no tolerance for politicians who weren't truthful. The challenge I would put out there is as you have more polarization and people are more apt to pick their truth and call things fake news if they don't like where it's coming from, and you've got more sources of information that tend to cater towards what views you have, those sources of accountability are becoming less effective than they used to be. And the problem that this poses for our republic is if you get people in a legislature who are starting from different views as to what the facts are, it becomes really hard to create public policy. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a great senator from New York, said, "You've got the right to your own opinion, but not to your own facts." I share your concern that we are at a time when there's more willingness to assert what the facts are, as opposed to being more empirically rigorous and asking, okay, what's really going on?
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up on what you just said there. It's kind of similar to where we were about 10 minutes ago in discussion. There's kind of a difference between, I think my facts are correct, so I really deep down inside me have a view of the facts that I really believe are the facts. Now, how it got there through social media, news, whatever, is a discussion about, how could someone be genuinely, incorrect to the facts, but believing they have a correct view of the facts. But then there's also the situation where they can't possibly, in their right mind, really believe those are facts, yet it's convenient to treat them as facts because it helps, me and my party. Therefore, I'm going to just keep repeating them and not really care whether or not, they're facts. A lot of them are it's just that can't possibly be true. You do realize that, yet you keep repeating it. And both those things are happening in large amounts right now.
Yeah, we've been talking a bit about norms, and I'll mention a few more that are important to try to hold on to. One is intellectual humility. So I mentioned intellectual curiosity before. Intellectual humility to me means what I learned from the first judge who I clerked out here. He said, "I'm not afraid of what I don't know. I'm afraid of what I think I know." So anytime I'm looking at a situation, I try to stay humble. How do I know for sure that this is right? The other thing I would say, and this is important, when someone else says something and I wonder, is that right? Instead of saying you're wrong or that's a lie, I would try to say, I learned this from a friend of mine, Tony Spurlock, what's your source for that? And then if you're someone like you, Dan, who's thoughtful, you'll actually try to come up and say, here's my source. And then I can look at that and say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of that way, and continue to reflect on, okay, what's really going on here? And sometimes in complicated areas, there's a lot of noise. It's hard to get the signal.
Yeah, without mentioning names, I shared with you a story that we kind of recapped on before we got started with the podcast, where a close friend of mine who has different political views than sometimes I have. I consider myself more of a centrist, but probably centrist leaning right, not a centrist leaning left. And we were having a conversation, casual conversation over dinner, and this goes back some time, so call it a year and a half. And however we got into it where he would say some things, and I would say, well, those aren't really true, right? That isn't true. Or somehow we got into that, and he's like, yes, that's true. Why do you think they're not true? And I'm looking at him, I'm like, you really think that's true, what you just said? And he really did. So he did what you just said. He said, well, if you don't think those true, why don't you go and show me sources that, justify why they're not true? So I was busy the next day, but for some stupid reason, I spent 3 hours. I tracked each one of those and gave source, saying, okay, these are sources, that support what I'm saying, and I think they're objective sources. I don't think these are someone's spin. I think they're fact-based sources, and it was very uncomfortable. I mean, it was very uncomfortable. The whole exchange was uncomfortable. The aftermath of it was uncomfortable. But at least we went through that process.
It's an important process, and I mentioned Ginsburg and Scalia before. Having that dialogue, I believe, steel sharpens steel. And there's a case that when I worked for her, she decided involving the Virginia Military Institute. Her premise was not admitting women violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. Scalia dissented. His premise was courts shouldn't make this decision. We should leave it to the democratic process to make it. And when he wrote his dissent, which was withering, she got it on a Friday, a courtesy copy. He didn't share it with anyone else, just gave it to her. She said, that draft dissent ruined my weekend, but it made the opinion stronger. And let me tell you another story, which comes...
What did she mean made the opinion stronger?
Because he made arguments that she hadn't dealt with before. And so she had to respond to his arguments, and it improved the quality of her argument.
Gotcha.
Let me give you another example, which is a little more like the one you just mentioned. This was a case that came out of the D.C. Circuit. Steve Williams, who used to be on the faculty at CU, who I adore, he's no longer with us, and David Tatel, who's still with us and a friend. Just David Tatel wrote a book, and this story is in his book, and I did a fireside chat with him. He talked about it. He had an opinion where he was dissenting. Steve Williams wrote the majority opinion. They went through 20 drafts back and forth, where he kept saying, what's your source for that? What's your source for that? How about this? How about that? They wrote memos to each other while they kept revising their dissent and their opinion. And by the end, they really narrowed the scope of the disagreement. They narrowed what facts they thought were significant for what reasons. And they published the final opinion and the final dissent. And one of them said to each other, I wish we could share all the drafts and all the memos so the public could see the type of discourse that we had between the two of us that got us to where we were.
Yeah. I mean, an example, and I don't want to get into a discussion about abortion as a general issue, but an example of the overruling of the abortion law and how that's been characterized afterwards, because those who overruled it basically said, in our form of government, you have a legislative body who makes laws, you have a president who signs them into law. That's your guys' job. You guys go figure this out. Don't rely on a court ruling to do your job for you. That should be something that's made into a law. Now, you could argue well, maybe sometimes laws have to be overruled by the Supreme Court. I think civil rights is a perfect example of that. So you could argue that they shouldn't have done that they should have upheld it. They should not have said, this is something we're kicking back to you. But at least you should be able to reflect and say, I disagree with the Supreme Court did. But what the Supreme Court did is they said, the other two branches of government have to deal with this. This is yours to deal with. So whether you agreed with that or not, you should at least acknowledge that's what they did. They didn't, express a point of view about abortion.
Well, this is a challenge that I have all the time, keeping separate what it means to be part of a legal process versus what policy opinions I may have. I will say on the merits of that Dobbs decision, there are two areas that I find wanting in the majorities. One is how aggressive they were in overruling the decision with regard to what's called stare decisis, that there was a precedence that were on point. And one way to look at this is Roberts, the Chief Justice, he wrote separately, he didn't join the majority. He said they should only have decided 12 weeks of an abortion ban law, which was the Mississippi law before them, is constitutional, full stop. And the majority went and said any abortion ban, even with no exceptions, is acceptable. So it was a very far-reaching decision that overruled a bunch of precedents. The second point is, and this is the point that Ginsburg talked about at her nomination hearing, if you believe the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution protects women's right to live lives where they can be equal to men, I believe it's not equal for a woman to be told, you've got to bear a child to term, something that a man would never be forced to do based on biology, because that's going to limit women's ability to be successful citizens. And so I think there's a strong equal protection argument that the majority failed to reach. Would
you, well, since you brought that part up, yeah. I'll feel a little bit more open. And I don't come at this from a religious point of view.
Right.
I like to joke with my family, which is a very religious family, Catholic family, that somehow when they were passing out the religious genes, they missed me. I just never felt inside of me kind of, whatever it is that makes most people have a religious kind of point of view, religious kind of drive to them. I don't, that's not a question of judgment anyway. It's just, I don't have that. It's not inside of me. Maybe I wish it was inside me so I could have some kind of comfort in kind of a vision of an afterlife. So I don't have that, but it is what it is. So I don't come at this from a religious point of view, but I do come at it from the point of view of, at some point there is this unborn child that is deserving of protection. Okay, so at one end of the extreme of the pregnancy, I see the point where, hey, there's this unborn child. On the other end of the extreme, when the pregnancy has happened, I see they're very strong weighting toward, the mom, the woman. So between those two extremes, you have this middle, a long middle. And reasonable people maybe who come at it from where I come at it might disagree on, at this point, it shifts more to the unborn child. At that point, it shifts more to the woman. So I don't think it's unreasonable to be able to have a civil discussion about how do you balance those two factors in a way that's respectful to women, and not, coming at it from the point of view that I'm a male, therefore I'm going to pass my judgment on to you as a non-male, but the balance between the unborn child, and the mother.
And Roe versus Wade left space for just that. Mm-hmm. The principle that Roe sought to get at is in the first and second trimester, where there was a concern by a woman for whatever reason, could be rape, incest, could be health, could be mental health, there was going to be a constitutional protection. But at some point, the interest of the state would allow for restriction on abortion access. That framework, the Roe framework, was thrown out by Dobbs, and states were given the freedom to do whatever they want, which is why we're now seeing women bleeding out because they're not
just the states, the federal government was too.
Yes, federal government could act too.
So I think it's really important to say
that's fair. You could have a federal.
The Justice Department said, you guys are the legislative. You're federal legislators.
That's right.
And your state legislators.
That's right.
This is your responsibility to figure this out, whether at the federal level or at the state level. We're punting to you guys, but I'm not defending their argument. I'm characterizing what that argument is. This is your responsibility, not ours. You go figure out what is a right balance that represents the people of the country.
And what we've seen is a level of activism with a lot of women getting involved in states across the nation, Kansas, Montana, Ohio, to protect access to abortion care.
Yes.
And so that is...
And rightfully so. Rightfully so, meaning, they're the citizens of the country and they have strong voices and they can influence the outcome, and they are successfully influencing the outcome in many states. So, yeah, I don't have like a strong point of view on exactly what the right outcome is and where. It's more just the point of, can we talk about this in a way that is, one, respects the facts, and two, respects that there's room for responsible people to have different points of view. Now, there are extremities on that on both sides. That maybe is a different discussion. So if someone takes the extreme view, how do you deal with that? Maybe you just deal with that saying, that's great, but the extreme view is never going to be the majority view. I don't think so. Let's not get too caught up in the extreme views so long as they don't prevail.
You made another point here, Dan, that I might come back to, which is about religion. And I will say one of the challenges in public policy is when an issue is treated, it may or may not be motivated this way, but it's treated as a religious issue.
Yeah.
At that point, it's harder to have dialogue because somebody say, this is an article of faith to me. And I would, in that situation, accept, well, if there's an article of faith, then it's not a matter that we're going to necessarily shed light on through dialogue. It's important for me and most public policies to say, this is about figuring out the best answer for our society.
Yes.
And I don't think most public policy issues are answered in the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments may have some values that I will look at and think about. And if they help inform me about what it means to be a better person, so to speak. My religious tradition absolutely affects my worldview, but in general, I'm making public policy decisions based on my analysis of what is the facts, what are empirical, and then whatever disciplines I can bring to it, economics or technology or hydrology and water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, you got to respect that people will have very strong points of view driven by religion, and how you deal with that is tricky. But hopefully in the country we live in, the need to find kind of a consensus kind of overrides kind of, the religious minority on any particular issue.
Mario Cuomo, who was governor of New York when I was growing up, had this really powerful position he tried to explain, which is he was a very religious Catholic, and he believed that he would never want in his family anyone to have an abortion. But he said, that's my religion. I don't necessarily want others to have my religious views forced on them. And that's an important point I think about, which is America was set up for pluralism, to allow people to live their lives and express their views, and whatever religious view or non-religious view they have, it's important that we don't essentially force people to adopt a religious view on one issue or not.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree on that. I mean, what obviously makes abortion the tricky one is if the point of view is protecting an unborn child, that's diametrically in conflict with protecting the rights of women. And, you got to navigate a really tough, tricky dynamic there. But I think the real point is, can we do that through conversation, through discourse, through respecting that there is room for different points of view, and then try to find kind of good solutions from there, as opposed to making such that that being such a a topic that's even hard to talk about without potentially offending someone in such an extreme way, as opposed to, can we just have a conversation about this?
We can have the same conversation we just had about reproductive freedom around gun safety. There are people who
Absolutely.
have views on firearms that are at sometimes not open to conversation. And I would say, as we think about public safety and we think about gun violence, we have to ask, maybe there's some people who get access to firearms who shouldn't have them.
Absolutely.
And what can we do to protect people? And try to bring that, what I would call sort of a public health mindset to bear. We've saved a lot of lives in this country by making automobiles safer and by cutting down on traffic fatalities. Can we bring the same mindset? How can we save lives from gun violence?
Yeah. How can we clearly, we're living in a world now where you're seeing gun violence result in lots of innocent people dying. Okay, that's not an opinion coming from one side or the other. That's kind of a starting point for a conversation. So, okay, what can we do about that? You should be able to have a conversation. And if you do have a conversation, there's going to be compromises that need to be made. Whatever, if you have an extreme starting point one way or another, the right answer isn't the extremities of one side or other. It's some kind of conversation that leads to, here's things we can do that will make the situation better.
Let me give you an example, which is really a piece of what we've been talking about. When I was elected, I made clear that I believed we should have a red flag law in Colorado. And as it was being debated, I went and did town halls across the state. I did one in Canyon City, and the head of the Republican Party showed up, and he said, here is a letter that we've all signed. We're calling on you to resign because of your position on the red flag law.
Wow.
And I said, I was hoping for your endorsement, back to my point about your politician who has won as many votes as you can get. I'll try harder next time.
Yeah.
And then we had a conversation. And they said, here are our concerns about the red flag law. And I listened to the concerns, thought about them, and worked to incorporate them into the law to make it better. And let me just give a shout out to Hugh McCain, who used to be the minority leader. He's passed away. Such a special guy and a dear friend. Hugh was a big critic of this red flag law. And he went and told the then majority leader, here are my concerns on the law. And they had the conversation at the majority leader's kids' soccer game. And Alec, the majority leader, improved the law based on the conversation. Hugh still opposed it, gave a speech where I thought it was still bad. And after it passed, he hugged Alec, and they're still friends. That's what politics should look like.
Yes, I agree. So speaking of politics, let's go up a level and talk about some of the global challenges that we're facing today. And again, very complex issues, very complex, very strong points of view on both sides, and understandable in many respects. In about a year and 2 months ago, maybe a year and a month ago, I went on a trip to the Middle East. And one of my stops in the Middle East was not just Beirut, but it was taking a drive around Lebanon, an 8-hour drive going in and out of the mountains, along the shores, in and out of Hezbollah territory, in and out of territory that was Christian, with a really close friend of mine who grew up there, didn't live there at that point, but flew out there, met me, took me around, and a company that I'm invested in. Got to dinner with them, saw their business, they were thriving, and it was only a couple weeks after that the event that triggered the current war took place. So I was fortunate that I've got to meet the people of Lebanon. I got to experience the country. I had the opportunity to say, man, what an opportunity there is here to, it's beautiful, beautiful country with beautiful access to water, with hardworking people who were navigating through a very tricky political environment that was local there. And then boom, everything that happened since then. So I feel fortunate that I have more of an understanding based on that of maybe the people who are being impacted by it. But it is such a complex situation. I mean, to think of what people who are living in Israel are going through. I mean, you've got people all around you who overtly say what they want to do is pretty much wipe you off the face of the earth. What are you supposed to do? Yet those people are intermixed with, their societies. They include a whole bunch of innocent people, but it's all intermixed together. I think part of the same conversation we were just having is it surprised me that more people from the vantage point of the U.S. can't appreciate the complexity of the situation there, the points of views of all sides. It's not going to lead you to an easy answer, but certainly maybe would lead you not to be so extreme in whatever your point of view is. How do this is much more personal to you given your heritage than me. How do you make sense of that situation?
I really appreciate what you just said. And I gave remarks commemorating a Babi Yar massacre, which was one of the large massacres that happened during World War II in the Ukrainian Jewish community. The point you made that I want to lift up is, I'm going to call it bearing witness to two things at once. Right now, in Gaza, in Lebanon, two fronts of a war, there are innocent people whose lives are being devastated. There are innocent people whose lives are being lost. And if you can't see that, like you just described it in Lebanon right now, or that's also in Gaza, you're not taking in the fullness what's happening. It is also true, Hezbollah, Iran, and Hamas have a very clear mission, and you said it. They want to wipe Israel off the map. When Iran talks about the occupation, they're not talking about the West Bank. They're talking about Haifa. They're talking about Tel Aviv. They don't believe Israel should exist at all. They won't recognize Israel as a state. Hezbollah uses terrorist tactics, this means something very specific, to terrorize the population north of Israel so people can't live in their homes. Hamas did something on October 7th, if you are able to take it in, that is so horrifying. They not just massacred women and children, including at a peace festival, they raped women purposefully as a strategy. That was the plan. So you asked me, how do I take all that in? It's gutting. All of it's gutting. I want to have a peaceful Gaza, a peaceful Lebanon, and a peaceful Israel where people can live in security and live thriving lives. And Israel wants to help its neighbors as a community. And Israel, as you put it, is afraid because what happened on October 7th it's hard for Americans to understand this, that there's still 100 hostages whose families are every day gutted. At the Democratic National Convention, John and Rachel spoke about their son Hirsch, who has since been murdered, who's a hostage. And they said their heart breaks for innocent Palestinians. Every day the hostages aren't home. You're missing time with your family, and that every human life is in its own world, and you want to save every world. So I'm living with a lot of pain, knowing what's happening, and I refuse to give up hope that we are going to get to a better place in the Middle East. I do know a lot of Israelis who want nothing more than to be able to live in peace and to be able to get to what you described in Lebanon, which are neighbors who live together in harmony. And what's hard about this is when you have an ideology like Hezbollah or Hamas, a terrorist ideology with no regard for human life, it does put Israel in a very challenging situation. And Iran, as we know, is behind all this. They don't want peace in the Middle East. One of the sad things about October 7th was it came in large part because Israel and the United States were getting ready to have more normalizing relations and trying to lift everybody up. And that's
including with Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
And as part of my trip, not that one, but in the last 6 months, 9 months, maybe February timeframe, I had the opportunity to visit Saudi Arabia as well as UAE and get a sense for the transformation that has been taking place in Saudi Arabia and how that directly, influenced this to happen.
And let me add a hopeful point on this. Saudi Arabia, and I believe the UAE, have done something, and this comes back to this point about facts too, Dan. They've changed their education textbooks. A lot of the anti-Semitic tropes have been used by Hamas or Hezbollah, the way Jews are talked about. And in Saudi Arabia, they would have an educational system where people often were told these things about Jews that were designed to make people in Saudi Arabia hate Israeli Jews. And that's changing now. They're changing how people are talking about Jews and talking about Israel. And one of the things I appreciate about America so much is this is a nation, we talked about this, committed to allowing religious freedom, and that whatever religion you are or don't religion you have, you're treated equally under the law and you're viewed as a person who's entitled to dignity. And that's part of what I hope we can get in the Middle East, which is everyone views everyone else, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're Jewish, as a person entitled to dignity.
Yeah, which we're, barring some miracle, that's not going to happen in our lifetimes, unfortunately. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know how long it takes. It's one of the challenges.
The point is that aspiration. Yeah. We have to recognize a lot of time would have to go by in a positive direction to get anywhere close to what you're describing there. And that's the reality that we in the world face, especially people in proximity to that. I mean, the other way I think about it is, I think you would agree this is a fact. At least I think it's a fact. Iran is building nuclear weapons. Is that safe to describe that as a fact?
The inspectors who had been there, I believe they've been kicked out. And Iran has said they have nuclear ambitions. This is obviously part of the scary equation, which is
exactly
what are they up to and how do we contain Iran? The challenge in the world, to pull out even further from the Middle East, is what we might call liberal democracy, free markets, open economies, are facing a challenge from more authoritarian governments who govern because they keep their population in fear.
Yes.
And the thought when we had the end of the Cold War is maybe we could end the rise of different authoritarian governments and spread more democracy and free markets. And right now, that plan isn't going as we might have hoped. A generation later, we're actually seeing more authoritarian governments, more hard right governments on the rise.
Yeah, which gets us back to a lot of our earlier discussion and boy, did this play out when I was visiting the Middle East. The fact that our house is in so much disorder, puts us in a position where we can think of ourselves as the beacon of hope. We can think of ourselves as the role models for what a free society should look like, what a thriving economic, what a diverse kind of community that is very functional should look like. The rest of the world, we look like we're freaking idiots. I mean, they are just blown away at how much dysfunction they observe, not in our general society, but in, when they put the political lens on. I mean, and you can't really defend. You can't say, well, I hear you, but the reason you're mistaken is because of this. You say, I hear you, and you know what? I agree with you. It's embarrassing as for me, at least it was when I was traveling over there, knowing kind of what's going on the ground here and seeing how they see the same thing. And why can't we get our house more in order? And that's the rhetorical question.
Well, but let me say this, and it gets to some of what I talked about. The work that I've been able to do here in Colorado, in a range of areas, youth mental health, the opioid crisis, the work we've done together building entrepreneurial communities, this work at the state level is real. It's happening. And all the noise and the food fight you see in Washington, I'm not living it here in Colorado. The work that I'm doing.
I mean, when I did the podcast with Mayor Mike Johnson, I felt more uplifted from that conversation from a political point of view than I felt since I was maybe in college. It's like, wow, there's a pragmatic conversation, pragmatic way of thinking about the big problems that we have and paths to solving them, and what seemed to be a very genuine commitment. Now, he's obviously in a political party, pretty much everyone is who's in a political position, but that's not what the conversation part wasn't. His political party's point of view versus some other point of view. It was a non-political conversation that had this pragmatism approach to it and a optimistic approach that, hey, these are hard problems, but we can solve them, and we are solving them. And boy, I felt good after that.
Well, I'm doubly lucky because I not only get to work in Colorado, where our work is done in a way that's not partisan or polarized. I also work with other state AGs from other states, including Republican state AGs who I'm working with to go after social media platforms that are harming young people's mental health. Or I mentioned the opioid crisis. We've gone after a lot of companies like Purdue Pharma that pushed these drugs that were very addictive and lied to people about it. That's meaningful work within the rule of law in a bipartisan way. So I have felt in the work I've gotten to do really honored and appreciative that it's not, like you said, the food fight you see if you look at Washington.
Although I got to say, we Colorado, we've got to be more careful and accountable. And I'll pick one issue. Hopefully this isn't one that puts you in a situation. I don't think you were involved with this, but the notion that our elected politicians were taking actions to remove a candidate for president off the ballot that clearly somewhere approximately 50% of the country support, that was clearly inappropriate. I mean, whether you like the person or not like the person, vote for him or not, the fact that we were willing to stoop down to that federal dysfunctional level means it's creeping into here. And if we don't defend that, we don't say, hey, this is Colorado, we're not going to play those games. We're not going to get sucked into that. We can easily find our way going that direction too.
The case you mentioned was actually a lawsuit filed against the state. So I defended the following principle, and this is all we did. If someone is, let's call it, not eligible, because to take one example, it's obvious, they're less than 35 years old, a state can remove them from the ballot as ineligible. We, at our department, were not involved at all pushing the argument that someone had been ineligible because of, in this case, it was an insurrection clause. That was not the role we played. We played more we manage the ballot. If someone is not a lawful candidate, then the state doesn't have to put them on the ballot. Obviously, it was a 9-0 decision saying that theory, the insurrection clause theory, didn't hold. And we're going to have an election in a few weeks, and the public has to decide.
Good, but and I don't know what role you or your office played in that whatsoever. So this isn't a comment toward that.
Only the one I mentioned, which is we're responsible. This happens all the time. If a ballot issue comes up, someone didn't get enough signatures. We can say if they don't meet the legal requirements, we don't put them on the ballot. And that's the role we play, which is more of a defensive role. We don't get into judging whether someone should be on the ballot or not.
Yep, good. But the bigger point there was the fact that some of our politicians were advocates for him being removed from the ballot, as opposed to saying, hey, let's start with, I'm not going to vote for that person, but as a responsible elected official, I'm not going to support kind of a argument that he shouldn't be on our ballot, because that's up to the Coloradans to decide who they want to vote for, and we're not going to meddle in that by trying to remove one of the front runners from the process. I would have loved for our politicians to have that opinion from day one, been vocal about it, and stick with that. Instead, they didn't. At least some of them didn't, and that was quite embarrassing as a Coloradoan, and a sign of we got to be careful, or we could fall in the same traps that our federal government has fallen in, and some of the other states have as well.
It's really important, as you say, that we maintain a spirit of discourse and respect for one another. That's how I believe we're going to keep our republic together. And in Colorado, I got to tell you, I travel all across the state. When we did this merger review for the Kroger-Albertsons merger, I went to 19 town halls. On the work on the opioid crisis, I've gone all across the state. People show up, and the main thing is when you treat people respectfully, they appreciate you for doing it. Speaking of respectful people, you want to get back to Brad Bernthal.
Yes, because he deserves both of our respect.
He sure does.
Who is Brad Bernthal? Who is this guy? Where did he come from? How did you guys develop a partnership? How many lives has he affected?
Yes, he has.
Of young people who are in kind of formative parts of their life journey.
I mentioned that my life was fortunate that I got into this telecom world. I got this job at CU, and I started teaching at CU in the spring of 1999. I am pretty sure the fall of 1999, or it could have been the fall of 2000, I taught telecommunications law to both law students and interdisciplinary telecom program students. And Brad Bernthal was one of them.
Really?
Yeah, and at one point I found the midterm exam he took or something and gave it back to him. And he was one of the best students I had. And then came a few years later, the question about, was CU going to give up the entrepreneurial law clinic that had been established? Because it was established by an adjunct professor, and that person was going to stop teaching. I told the then dean, I'll teach it, which I had no business teaching entrepreneurial law. I had never practiced transactional law, but I said, I'll figure it out. I don't want us to lose this clinic. I reached out to Brad Bernthal and said, Brad, would you come back to CU and you can help me teach the entrepreneurial law clinic? And for one semester, we taught it together, and then he took it over from there.
Wow.
And that was around
I didn't know that. Sorry,
that
I
was
didn't
the
know the
story.
origin. Okay.
And then that was the same time we started to build out this entrepreneurial initiative of Silicon Flatirons. And I said, Brad, why don't you take it and run with it? So Brad was a student of mine, incredibly talented. I had recommended him for a job, I think at Brobeck initially. It was a law firm he went to in the Bay Area. He came back here to Colorado, and I got to recruit him back to CU, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and he's done a great job developing the whole, certainly the entrepreneurial initiative part of Silicon Flatirons, probably more than that. Been a big leader across all the programs that you and I talked about earlier. He's played a central role in that. And he's done it in a way where I think he must be positively affecting the lives of dozens and dozens of students each year.
So when I was the dean of the law school, I would say the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic had 20 students in it each year, something like that. Every single one of those students had a job by graduation. So that was a pretty remarkable accomplishment. And it's because Brad took an interest in every student, in their professional development, in their building their network, and their finding jobs. Brad's mindset was always, how do I support every student in the deepest way possible? And for the students who got to know him, it's clear what you say. He has totally affected and changed the trajectory of their lives.
Yep. And one other thing you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the new venture challenge, putting up some prize money in the form of safe notes in order to inspire and encourage and reward kind of students who are developing kind of real entrepreneurial businesses. So with Brad Feld's support, we put a proposal in front of the president of CU and the new president of University of Colorado and the new chancellor of CU on how to step that up significantly with us putting serious money behind that. And we're kind of in the early dialogue about what that would look like. But what we're hoping to do is step that up so that the winning teams could have prize money that would be at or above $1 million per year.
Wow.
If we could get this figured out, which would certainly spur a bunch of activity of the right type with real businesses being created and launched coming out of CU.
Well, Dan,
the other universities, by the way, where the vision is not just CU Boulder and not just University of Colorado, it's collegiate that involves some of the other universities as well.
We do need that whole ecosystem approach, that we're all Colorado, we're all in this together, we all root for each other. I love your getting behind it and pushing it. And I should give you a shout out now about the work on quantum, where thanks to your and others' leadership, we're now getting this federal support to be a quantum hub. So I'm optimistic about Colorado. And the way I would put it, back to some of the theme, is yes, this toxic polarized virus that's taken hold of Washington.
I like that you're calling it virus.
It's a virus. It could spread. Our job is to build up our immunities to it, is to build up the positive norms about how we all show up and how we engage one another. Part of what makes any team successful, I know how much you live this, is bringing in diversity, diverse thought, diverse backgrounds, diverse perspectives. And if you can build successful teams that are diverse and include different people, you can do anything.
Yep. And if you would like to, I certainly would like to do a follow-up on this that's focused on work you're doing on the opioid and the comments you made about kind of I don't want to put words in your mouth, but pharmaceutical industry, food industry, and this other pandemic that is affecting us in significant ways around the lack of healthiness and how that might be tied to these other factors. And that's a comfortable topic.
It's very comfortable. I'll give you the preview now. We in the United States of America have a connection crisis. Too many people are lonely, isolated, disconnected. They're turning off into substances. We've seen a huge vaping epidemic among young people. We've seen, obviously, the opioid crisis. Around youth mental health right now, it is a very difficult story. And we have leaned in on this work, starting with the work around the opioid crisis, where we took on a lot of these companies like Purdue Pharma that pushed out these medications. And now we're focused on the impact of social media. I mentioned vaping. There's a lot we're doing on this, and we're making important progress, and there's a lot of important work to do.
Good. Well, thank you for being a guest on the podcast. We covered a lot of territory, including some topics that are hard to have conversations with. I feel like we were able to have those in a way that won't be not just polarizing to us, it obviously wasn't, but shouldn't be polarizing to people who listen to this either. And hopefully it'll help people understand that we need to start being able to have conversations about these more tricky and these more difficult topics where whatever your starting point of view is, you're able to have a conversation with others who might have a different point of view, but being able to do it to learn from both directions. To me, that's amongst the most important, hopefully, takeaways from people who listen to this.
Well, what I want people to know on this is I've gotten to have that experience as Attorney General so many times over. So I've worked with leaders in Baca County on issues around housing down there, for example, and opioids. And at one point, one of the county commissioners said to me, Phil, I'd like to talk to you more about the Second Amendment. It means something different to us here in Baca County than it does in Denver. And I said, I'd like that too. I understand. Building that dialogue, that trust is something that we've done over years. It's important that people do it. It's important that people stay in dialogue. So thank you for encouraging it, Dan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Wars featuring Phil Weiser. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg with support from Courtney Caruso, Allie Berman, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.